Good evening. I'm Julianna Margulies, and it is an honor to be with you tonight in support of Physicians for Human Rights and in celebration of some extraordinary medical professionals. Early in my career, I worked on a medical drama. However, I refuse to say I'm not a doctor, but I played one on TV. One, because that's silly, and two, because I played a nurse. But I have been able to work with a number of doctors, nurses, technicians, and researchers. And I am always struck by what unites them: a deep desire to help, a driving need to heal, and an understanding that it shouldn't matter where you are from, your religion, your politics, your gender, your socioeconomic status. Access to healthcare without discrimination is a human right. But in our world, there is a wide chasm between what should be and what is. And working tirelessly to bridge that divide is Physicians for Human Rights. 35 years ago, PHR started when a small group of doctors decided to use their medical training to not only save lives, but to safeguard human rights, to expose torture, sexual violence, and extreme abuses. It started small, but today it's a movement of thousands of health workers around the world. Tonight, we honor health workers who advocate for justice in the face of ongoing attacks. The honorees represent PHR's vision and commitment to build a network of medical professionals mobilized for human rights and justice everywhere. Those honorees include a brave nurse who exposed gross abuse of immigrant women held in a private prison in Georgia, a Syrian doctor who, despite suffering greatly on the front lines himself, continues his activism across the Middle East, health professionals in Myanmar, joining protests and caring for patients amidst violent political upheaval, and a founding member of PHR, a doctor who observed firsthand how politics and economic repression impacted health, and new health workers could be the credible voice desperately needed in the fight for human rights. I want to thank you for being with us. Thank you also to PHR's board, to the fabulous Gala Committee, and especially the co-chairs of tonight's gala, Marion and Stanley Bergman, Sharon and Bradley Connor, Ashley Garrett and Alan Jones, Carolyn and Raymond Happy, Kristen and Austin Ratner, and Carrie Solkowitz. All of you, in ways large and small, have made an investment in PHR just by being here tonight. It has yielded tremendous results, and I can't wait for you all to see how even in these most challenging of times, PHR has changed and will continue to change the world. Thank you.
All around the world, people are speaking out.
It has made it more democratic.
Over 1,000 kids have been separated.
Physicians for Human Rights documented the use of chemical weapons.
Building a movement for profound social change. Now, more than at any time in history, health professionals are on the front lines of the struggle.
We were just speaking with the many medics.
For basic rights, health, equality, dignity, and justice. Physicians for Human Rights is mobilizing new advocates, wielding the power of science and medicine, fact-based disciplines that give us authority and credibility. Because we know that through evidence, change is possible.
COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
As the coronavirus first began to spread rapidly across the globe, PHR pivoted immediately to make the pandemic a central focus of all areas of our work. We called for leadership to protect frontline health professionals
Thank you so much for joining us once again for our speaker series. We welcome leading voices in human rights, science, medicine, as well as voices from the front lines.
We knew the inequalities that we saw in testing would be recapitulated when it came to vaccines.
And continue to advocate for vaccine equity around the world. As cries for racial justice proliferated across the United States and the world, police met protesters with barrages of tear gas, rubber bullets, and excessive force.
Newly released body cam footage shows the moment a protester was hit in the face with a rubber bullet.
PHR deployed a rapid response team to document local and federal forces' brutal violence. Our work helps spur police reforms, bans on the use of crowd control weapons, and investigations into police violence in cities across the United States.
Kids held behind chain-linked fences and razor wire.
Child internment camps, that's what I said.
We at Physicians for Human Rights call for a review of the policies related to border enforcement.
More than 100,000 people seek safe haven in the United States each year. Many survivors of torture, trafficking, and other forms of persecution.
I'm here with Physicians for Human Rights along the U.S.-Mexico border.
People are living here in camps, and we hear stories of lack of access to medical care, people being kidnapped, being threatened.
When U.S. authorities began separating children from their parents, PHR immediately sounded the alarm. PHR published the first medical and psychological evidence of the harms caused by the U.S. administration's catastrophic family separation policy.
In the words of Physicians for Human Rights, what they ended up doing was torturing.
PHR will continue to push for justice for families separated at the border, and to ensure fair, humane immigration policies at the U.S. border that are rights-respecting.
Hello, I'm Dr. Mona Hanna Atisha. In September of 2015, I publicly alerted the residents of Flint, Michigan, indeed the world, to the lead poisoning in our drinking water. My kids, my patients, were in harm's way. Fighting political and bureaucratic stonewalling wasn't easy, and the backlash was fierce. But as a medical professional, a pediatrician sworn to protect and heal, I knew I had to blow the whistle. I am honored today to introduce another whistleblower, a fearless woman who spoke up for those who were silenced, advocated for people being abused by the U.S. government, and refused to back down in the face of personal and professional threats and retaliation. I am speaking, of course, about nurse Dawn Wooten. While working at the Irwin County Detention Center, a private prison that housed ICE detainees in Ocilla, Georgia, Dawn witnessed unsafe work practices and a lack of medical care that led to the spread of COVID-19 within the facility and in the larger community. More horrifying, she also discovered that immigrant women were being subjected to forced hysterectomies and other invasive gynecologic procedures with dubious consent. As medical professionals, we have the power to make a difference. And that is why we cannot turn away in the face of abuse and inequality, even if that abuse and inequality is directed at us. We must speak out, shine the light, and change the system so that this never happens again. To learn more about the 2022 Physicians for Human Rights Award honoree, Dawn Wooten, watch this illuminating interview with New Yorker staff writer, Sarah Stillman.
Thank you so much, Mona. And enormous congrats, Dawn, for this honor. That's so well deserved. And I'd love to talk a little bit about how it came to be.
When I first started working at the detention center in Irwin County, I was a medication nurse, and I was also an on-site nurse. I graduated from that position to what we called a sick call nurse. But the primary goal for me was patient care. Primary goal for me was one-to-one care. And that was my basis for working inside of a detention center, but really then became really personal and familiar with the detainees that were inside of the facility. So then I began to find out what they were incarcerated for, their medical histories, kind of learned a little bit about their families. I learned that different ones were complaining about having sterilization procedures, that they were having them unconsented. I began to raise questions on the inside, but we were never told what really transpired.
How would you describe, even before COVID hit, what the conditions were like for the women who were detained inside the facility?
The conditions were very morbid. They had a hard time, a lot of times punished. They were threatened with not having food trays and threatened with the water being shut off and threatened not having phone calls to talk with family members, not knowing that this was a form of control.
And can you talk me through a little bit about what you remember when you first started learning about the non-consensual hysterectomies?
I'm getting these letters or these pieces of paper as I go down line. It says, this is my name, this is my A number. Can you tell me what procedure I had? So from 5 to 15, from 15 to 20, 20 to 25, 25 to 50 names. At some point, I'm still trying to put this thing together of what's going on. And a young lady comes out and says, what is he? The uterus collector? Is he going around collecting everybody's uteruses? And a light came on and it's like, what is really going on? I just did not sign on not to care for people inside of or outside of confined conditions. So that was one of the decisions, and a major decision that I decided at the time, that it's time to ask questions now in administrative authority. I was told to mind my business.
When in your mind did you kind of become a whistleblower?
Sarah, to be honest, I never knew what a whistleblower was, but I was upset and I knew something had to be done. So I went to this rally, and as time unfolded and evolved, I was turned a whistleblower. I just did what I knew what was more and ethically correct.
And then tell me about what happened when the case started to reach national attention. I remember, when you first spoke up and when it went public, this became a huge national story.
I grew up in a 1,200 populated town. I was trained to do what was correct and was trained to do what was right. And while all of this is going on at the same time, my kids are jumping for joy at this point because their mom is all over the TV. But when the dust settled from being on TV, now I'm nationally known. I had threats for my life, and I had threats for the lives of my children. So we're whisked away for about 4 months, 3 to 4 months underground now with a full bodyguard.
And then I know you also faced the issue of being shut out of other jobs.
So in looking for other jobs, in the city that I live in, there's a hospital here that I've put in over 90 applications for, from janitorial to being a candy striper. So once I realized that I was not going to be hired as a nurse, all of those positions they said were filled. And when you look back on the website, they're open. So now I'm realizing that I'm not getting a job inside of this hospital because I'm deemed as a liability.
Mm-hmm. And you've accomplished a lot together. I mean, these women also filed complaints. You filed formal complaints. You all let the federal government know, and you made a really significant difference to federal policy together.
I have a envelope. It's about 100 and maybe 20 names. And each one of us had a personal relationship. And it's heart-wrenching now. I regret to this day that there's not a connection because it's got to be hard for them.
I'm curious, when you look back on this whole whistleblowing journey you've been on, what do you feel most proud of? And I'm curious, what would you want other people who are thinking about being whistleblowers to know about the path ahead?
I've done something that needed to be did. I said something that needed to be said. I ran my mouth, and it counts for something. And not just talking, but counts for a catalyst. I want to be a catalyst for breaking generational curses. I want to be that catalyst for breaking the barriers. And a lot of activists have suffered off the back of, some lost lives off the back of change, but changes are being made, and we can band together as catalysts. Then we can shift a lot in this universe for the times that we are here. So we'll make our presence count,
I love that, Dawn. I love speaking with you. I love hearing about how you did what you did, and alongside so many of the women who spoke up, what you all accomplished. So again, enormous congratulations to you for this really well due award, and for everything that you've shared with us today and taught us.
Thank you for your time and consideration. I'm humbled.
I'm Austin Ratner, co-chair of tonight's event and champion of Physicians for Human Rights. Please join me in supporting PHR at this critical moment. PHR's work is grounded in science, fact, and the expertise of health workers who need PHR's support as they uphold these values and work to protect our human rights. Truth and justice are not something you wait around for. They're something we make happen by taking action. Please give. Thank you.
Hospitals have been repeatedly bombed in what has been described as a systematic campaign to force the opposition to surrender.
Throughout more than 10 years of conflict in Syria, PHR has meticulously documented criminal attacks on hospitals and the targeting, detention, and torture of medical workers who provide treatment to those in conflict zones.
We are calling on Syria and Russia to immediately stop attacks.
Many of the physicians and nurses we work with risk their lives by speaking out about the atrocities they see firsthand.
When I was tortured in detention, I was only asked about my role as a physician.
They are increasing the dosage of the torturing because we are doctors.
So we work hard to protect them.
Hello, my name is Dr. Ula Abbara, and it's my honor to be with you today to present this prestigious award to my friend and colleague, Dr. Hussam al-Nahhas. For all too many years, the Middle East and North Africa have been epicenters of outright attacks on healthcare in conflict settings, from the denial of the most basic healthcare needs to the bombings of hospitals and even the unlawful detention, torture, and murder of health professionals. Nowhere have these crimes been more consistent over the past decade than in Syria, where medical workers in the decade-long conflict continue to come under fire simply for providing healthcare to those in need. Physicians for Human Rights has made the ongoing emergency in Syria a key focus in its worldwide effort to investigate and document illegal attacks on healthcare. And one of the leading researchers in PHR's work in the MENA region is Dr. Hussam al-Nahhas. Prior to joining PHR, Dr. al-Nahhas worked on the front lines of healthcare response to the crisis in Syria. He volunteered in a clandestine network to coordinate care providers for those injured in fighting. He was an emergency room physician in a field hospital in Aleppo under constant threats and bombardment. And he was detained and tortured by the Syrian government simply for doing his job, providing medical care without discrimination. PHR gives this honour in recognition of extraordinary dedication to upholding medical ethics and human rights. And Dr. Hussam al-Nahhas is the embodiment of that ethos. Congratulations, my friend. And now, please enjoy this illuminating interview with Dr. al-Nahhas, conducted by acclaimed Washington Post national security reporter and author, Joby Warwick.
Thank you, Dr. Ibarra, for that introduction. And hello and welcome to everyone. I'm Joby Warwick. I'm a national security reporter for the Washington Post and author of my latest book, Red Line. And I am very pleased to be with our special guest of the day. Welcome, Hussam al-Nahhas. Very good to see you again. I wonder if you could take us back to the year 2011, just before the revolution started in Syria. Could you tell us a little bit about what your life was like then and what you were doing just before things got really dangerous in your country?
Early 2011, I was about to graduate from the medical school. I was on my 5th year, and I was studying in Aleppo. My family were in Damascus, and everything seemed normal.
Tell me a bit about the early days of the uprising.
The uprising started, and we started seeing on media what was happening in different provinces across the country, and how the security forces and the police were cracking down on protesters who were calling for freedom, democracy in the country.
And eventually, of course, things became dangerous for your colleagues. And you began to treat people, as I understand, people who had been injured, and that created problems with the authorities for you. Can you tell me about that?
The security forces and the Syrian government started cracking down on protesters by using firearms to shoot people and to kill them, and practiced like wide-scale detention against protesters. Also denied people access to healthcare in public hospitals and private hospitals. We were hearing and seeing people who got detained while in the emergency department seeking healthcare after being injured during a protest. As a healthcare provider witnessing this, I thought that it's my ethical obligation to provide services to these people.
How did it begin to affect you and your colleagues when the Syrian government began to look for ways to make examples of medical workers who were taking these kinds of risks?
The Syrian government criminalized providing healthcare to protesters and considered those who provide or deliver healthcare to any pro-democracy protesters as enemies to the state. So they started detention and they started detaining healthcare providers who are involved in or who were involved in these practices. 3 of our team members actually were detained, and that was on June 2012. And a few weeks after their detention, they were sent back to their families, tortured, killed under torture, and their bodies were burnt. And it was a clear message from the government back then that anyone who gets involved in providing healthcare will face the same fate.
You took a big risk on one particular evening and paid a price for it. Can you tell me about that, the day that you were arrested?
So in 2012, on August, I was heading from a hospital in a non-governmental controlled area in Aleppo City to a governmental controlled area to get some supplies, get some food. We were approached by guards from the security intelligence branch in Aleppo. So they searched my car, they searched me physically, and they found my medical student ID. Basically, they were able to build an assumption that I was providing healthcare unofficially to pro-democracy civilians. So they arrested me with my friend.
A frightening occasion for you, of course, and I'd love to know a little bit about what that experience was like and how you were treated.
It was only a few weeks after the detention and the killing of my three colleagues. So basically, when I knew that I was arrested, I never expected that I will get out of this experience alive. When they brought us into the detention center, they stripped us naked to do a very harsh physical searching. And during the interrogation, during the torture sessions, the only questions that we were asked were about and around the people we were working with, to who we provide healthcare, how do we get our supplies, who are the rest of the team members that we were working with. And in multiple occasions, actually, guards were inviting each other to torture me, saying, oh, this is the doctor, let's torture the doctor, can we be the doctor?
I remember just hearing your stories about how you faced danger every day from bombing. Sometimes the hospital was targeted, and all the while you're treating some very traumatic injuries and wounds.
It was well known during that time that living or staying near or in a hospital is way more dangerous than staying on the front line. Targeting healthcare infrastructure and healthcare providers was a tactic.
Let's fast forward a bit. Years passed, eventually you decided to come to the United States. Can you tell me about that decision and what your goals were when you decided to come here?
When I was working in Syria, I witnessed that besides providing healthcare to individuals who were affected by the conflict and by the brutal practices from the Syrian government, I realized that the health system itself started to collapse. I thought about pursuing a path where I can really help rehabilitating this health system and make sure that it provides services to those who needs without keeping anyone behind.
As we're sitting here right now, there's a war underway in Ukraine. And in this war, healthcare workers and facilities are being targeted. If you were to have advice for people in that region who are dealing with the same kinds of problems and risks that you faced, is there a word of advice that you would offer to them?
It's heartbreaking to see what's happening in Ukraine, but unfortunately I'm not surprised because this is something we experienced in Syria before. My advice to my colleagues in Ukraine is just to focus on the impact they make on people's lives. I really hope that we can see the international community moving to protect them, to protect healthcare in conflict in general. But until we achieve this, it's important that we keep focusing on the impact of our work and our impact on people's lives.
Well, it's been a real honor for me personally. I congratulate you. I wish you much success in the future.
Thank you very much, Joby.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Syme, Chief Operating Officer and Interim Executive Director of Physicians for Human Rights. At this very moment, in many parts of the world, courageous healthcare workers are risking their lives to protect the rights of the most vulnerable. They face life and death decisions for themselves and their patients every single day. It is imperative that we come together to support and recognize those who dedicate themselves to ensuring the health and protection of us all. Please join me in supporting PHR at this critical moment. Thank you.
Wherever healthcare is under attack, PHR is there.
The Russian military launched more than 100 ballistic and cruise missiles into Ukraine last night.
Ukraine calls this strike, which hit a maternity hospital in Mariupol, a war crime.
As the horror of the Russian invasion unfolded, PHR immediately sprang into action, creating and disseminating resources to investigate and document these war crimes so that those who commit these atrocities could face justice.
Hi, I'm Karen Namer, Director of Programs at Physicians for Human Rights. I'm here with Stephen Rapp, a PHR board member and former ambassador at large, heading the Office of Global Criminal Justice at the U.S. State Department. You have decades of experience as a prosecutor with the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and the Special Court of Sierra Leone. What needs to be done to support accountability for the devastation we are witnessing every day in Ukraine?
Well, the first thing we need is evidence. We need effective investigations that will show the pattern of the attacks as being really concentrating it on civilian infrastructure. So it's a war crime. And also evidence, particularly with these horrific crimes, such as the murder, torture, rape of persons in the occupied area of Busha, which the Russians controlled in late February and early March, to be able to attribute responsibility for those crimes up the chain. Because frankly, in international tribunals, quite often when those cases are prosecuted, the higher level individuals say they're done by rogue units. Frankly, in this situation, we think that it were part of the process by which Russia was terrorizing the civilian population. But proving that responsibility is also another key aspect. It involves working with the locals, with the medical personnel that are in there struggling and providing services even while bombs are falling on their head and colleagues are dying and their facilities are blown to bits.
Russia invaded Ukraine without provocation and has been bombarding the civilian population with airstrikes, interpersonal violence like torture, sexual violence, executions. Is this an opportunity to pursue the crime of aggression?
Well, there is not a court, an international court, with jurisdiction over the crime of aggression. In this case, the ICC does have jurisdiction over war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. But to prosecute aggression internationally, we'd need to establish a special tribunal. That can be done. The Ukrainians have requested it, but it would require basically other states to join them in a joint court, ideally with the endorsement of the UN General Assembly. And I think it would be appropriate to do that, because when people think about what happened in Ukraine on February 24th and think about what's happened since, the outrage of the world that was represented in 141-5 vote in the UN General Assembly was a peaceful people going to work, going to school, suddenly have death raining down out of the skies, not having done anything to provoke Russia. And that crime obviously led to all the other crimes. And after World War II, we prosecuted the crime of aggression. That really hasn't been done since. And I think this is an opportunity really to reinforce that norm and establish that precedent for the future. And I think people have awoken to the real necessity of establishing accountability and finding ways to do it that don't involve going through the Security Council and asking for Russia's permission.
What are some of the greatest challenges to documenting these kinds of war crimes?
Quite often where the evidence is produced are places where it's not safe for folks to go, not safe for the International Criminal Court to be there. And then you have to put that together with evidence that's been gathered on the battlefield. Now the positive thing is, if you can show that the Russian forces are doing it, you can chase that right up the chain of command for those kinds of crimes. Then you've got those other crimes, those interpersonal ones, and the rape and the torture, et cetera. They're always crimes once you can prove that they happened. But you have to show who was responsible for them, and there'll always be the argument that there wasn't an order to do those horrible things.
What do you see as the role of science and medicine in documenting these atrocities?
Well, science and medicine are essential, and certainly that's the theme of PHR, that with evidence change is possible. How do you prove that after the fact? Obviously with physical examination, but the effects of torture are often much deeper than that, and that requires the kind of careful questioning and sensitive questioning of the survivors that PHR helped develop as part of the Istanbul Protocol. This evidence will be essential to proving that the crimes were committed.
Are you hopeful that justice will be achieved?
Well, I certainly am quite hopeful, and we're already seeing that in Ukraine. I'm sure that there will be scores of individuals charged. And I'm confident, too, that the ICC will be able to get, mid-level or higher-level individuals to court soon.
Thank you so much for all of the contributions you've made. We're just so indebted to you for all you've done.
Glad to be able to assist.
Access to health care without discrimination is a human right. So it doesn't matter where you're from, your religion, your politics, your gender, your socioeconomic status. Everyone has the right to medical care and to be protected from abuse. PHR's worldwide network of medical professionals are on the front lines, advocating for and defending human rights and documenting abuses to ensure future accountability and justice. Never before has PHR's work been so urgently needed, and you can help them. Please join me in supporting PHR. Thank you.
And after more than a year of an ongoing military coup in Myanmar, PHR and our partners continue to document overwhelming evidence of the military regime's deadly targeting of hospitals and healthcare workers. We have also documented human rights abuses targeting Myanmar's Rohingya people and other ethnic minorities.
We're here in Balukhali camp. We're seeing the lucky refugees who were able to survive.
Our investigations documented the horrific, complex physical and psychological toll of sexual and gender-based violence on the Rohingya people. The evidence we've gathered is critical for ongoing accountability efforts that will one day bring the military and security forces of Myanmar to justice.
Burma, Myanmar is in the midst of a humanitarian and health crisis. Since the attempted military coup d'etat of February 2021, led by General Min Aung Hlaing, Myanmar's healthcare system has been attacked and has all but collapsed. Denial of access to medical care, treatment, and medicines has been used by the military as a weapon of war, compounded by direct attacks on medical facilities and personnel. According to the WHO, Myanmar is the deadliest place on earth for healthcare workers. The military has deemed delivering medicine, first aid, supplies, and medical personnel to conflict regions as material support to their opposition. As a result, the people of Myanmar are suffering and dying, often from easily treatable conditions. Despite the challenges and huge threats to their own security, many healthcare workers are at the forefront and the front lines of the opposition to the coup. These men and women are risking, and in some cases losing, their lives. Hundreds have been injured, and at least 30 healthcare workers have been killed. Under this threat, they've continued to provide care to all patients, led demonstrations and civil disobedience against the military regime, and shown an enduring commitment to their professional ethics and human rights.
PHR has worked in partnership with these remarkable medical professionals. They implored the world to form supportive partnerships with peaceful local leaders and organizations to ensure the supply of medical equipment and staff, and to safeguard the well-being of that staff and the communities they serve. They shared the following message in their own words. We, the healthcare professionals in Myanmar, are in dire need of more international support to carry out our humanitarian duties. Some civil disobedience movement doctors are being searched and arrested. Upon their capture, they are forced to sign a contract saying they will return to government service, which is controlled by the military. We appeal to the international community to increase pressure on the UN Security Council to adopt a resolution on Myanmar that guarantees the safe delivery of medicine and medical supplies and the safety of humanitarian assistance workers, that demands that all parties to armed conflict facilitate safe and unimpeded passage for medical and humanitarian personnel, and that holds the military accountable for violations of international humanitarian law and for grave human rights violations.
Security forces also raided private hospitals to find and arrest healthcare workers accused of participating, as well as protesters receiving treatment. Security forces have occupied hospitals. They have taken supplies, damaged facilities with indiscriminate shooting, forcing patients to seek care elsewhere. The impacts of these attacks over this past year are incalculable and will continue to have implications for many years to come, especially as they continue unabated. As one partner explained, quote, "One day without adequate health care is one more day with unnecessary and preventable deaths." The medical workers of Myanmar are risking their lives to provide urgently needed health care. They are risking their careers, their freedom, the safety of their own families and their very lives. And Physicians for Human Rights is honored to recognize them today as the heroes they are. To accept this award on behalf of this group of inspiring medical workers is one of their own. Their identity has been disguised for their protection, but their words are a clarion call that must be heeded.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Physicians for Human Rights, and thank you so much for a kind invitation for this event. Since the attempted military coup of February 2021, Myanmar's healthcare system has nearly collapsed. Denial of access to healthcare, treatment, and medicines have been used by the military as a weapon of war. This makes Myanmar being one of the deadliest places on earth for healthcare workers. Doctors have been leading the civil disobedience movement known as CDM, and despite their participating in the movement, many CDM doctors are still seeing and treating patients at the charity clinics and at private care, most of the time free of charge. However, the junta has been forcing many charity clinics to shut down, arbitrarily arresting the volunteer doctors with absurd charges like high treason. We as doctors, our job is to see patients who need our attention. We are just doing our work, and for this very reason, we are persecuted. Healthcare workers need to feel safe to be able to provide healthcare to the people, and the people also need to feel safe to seek healthcare. Many medical professionals continue to participate in the CDM even 1 year after the coup, whilst doing what they can to maintain the health of the public. Our sincere hope is that in the very near future, this entire health worker movement will no longer be necessary at all, and we will be able to provide healthcare publicly to all patients without having to run and hide or resort to underground clinics. Receiving a prestigious award like this means a lot to us. Such a recognition greatly encourages us to strike to do more for our fellow countrymen. Despite all of our efforts, this is truly the greatest time of need for our country. Myanmar people deserve democracy, and we cannot accept that a democratically elected government is overthrown and replaced by military rule. Please support us and don't forget our struggle for restoring democracy in Myanmar. We strongly believe that justice will prevail in the end.
I'm Alan Jones, co-chair of the Virtual Gala and board chair of Physicians for Human Rights. Please join me in supporting PHR at this critical moment. I've seen firsthand how PHR works tirelessly to mobilize and empower health workers to harness science and facts in upholding human rights for all. And during this event, you have too. Dr. Lawrence, Nurse Wooten, Dr. al-Nahhas, and the health workers of Myanmar have made an incredible impact in the world. As you hear and reflect on the compelling stories about human rights leaders in healthcare, I ask you to consider recognizing their dedication and tireless commitment by making a gift to PHR in their honor. Thank you.
Since our work began in 1986, we've made landmark contributions to the movement for human rights.
Landmines continue to kill and maim the innocent.
In 1991, our investigation in Cambodia helped to generate the political will to create an international treaty to ban landmines. For that, we share the Nobel Peace Prize. For more than 35 years, Physicians for Human Rights has meticulously documented egregious human rights violations. PHR will keep innovating, and together we will bring critical and credible evidence to the pursuit of justice and dignity for all.
Human rights is about fundamentally human dignity, and I think Bob exemplifies that to an enormous degree. He respects everyone's dignity. I think he's really exceptional at bringing people together.
Bob Lawrence is the kind of person that makes every organization and every person he touches better. I think Bob Lawrence is the person I most want to be.
There's no tribute higher than to be called a physician, and Bob is a physician in every single level of that word.
There's no question in my mind that Bob has been one of the most influential people in my life and career. He has fundamentally changed my pathways, waken me up to issues of climate change and human rights. And it's because of his convictions and vision that I think I was able to see that there was another way we could be doing so much of what we do in the work of health and human rights. And so I'm just forever grateful to him for all of his work, the just wide swaths of people he's impacted throughout the world, and all the mentees that he's inspired to fight for a better and healthier future.
Human rights wasn't something he taught, it was something that he lived. And I think it was really evident in the decisions he made and the choices he made. When Bob is bicycling to work every day and walking up 8 flights of stairs, you have to do the same because you can't not live up to Bob's example.
Bob Lawrence has become the patriarch of Physicians for Human Rights, always ready to protect and defend the organization.
When Bob and I were in medical school, aside from the usual classes that everybody took, we were lucky enough to discover a man by the name of Dr. Thomas Weller, who was actually a Nobel Prize winner, And he introduced both of us and several other classmates to the concept of global health. And it was at that time that many of us became interested in global health and human rights. Albert Schweitzer was still alive in those days, and he was kind of a role model for us. Human rights was always, one way or another, in his sights, but I think he was able to focus it by coming together with other physicians at a crucial time that allowed him to participate in the forming of Physicians for Human Rights.
Bob turned out to be a leader when on the board and then as board chair, who injected calm and perspective in every conversation we had.
He shares the outrage at injustice, but he never displays an angry disposition. We're in, in a profession where simply doing what we do best, which is healing and caring for others, allows us to combat the adverse effects of hate around the world.
The first time that I had worked directly with Bob in the field. What really impressed me was, one, he was so courageous. Secondly, he was a really good listener and very empathetic. People were drawn to him and wanted to tell their stories and wanted to confide in him. I think for me, that was, from that moment on, Bob was going to be a partner in working in health and human rights.
At the end of apartheid, when Bob led a group of human rights activists, and I was privileged to be among them, to speak to the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission in the late 1990s, it held special hearings on the role of various professions, including the medical profession, which had such a terrible record of racism and discrimination. In fact, Bob had been part of a 1989 delegation of the American Association for the Advancement of Science that wrote a report called Apartheid Medicine. That title, of course, tells it all, and yet made a powerful statement explaining how there had to be accountability for members of the medical community who had been done so much to harm the Black people of South Africa.
Over the years, Bob became a beloved mentor. I valued his wisdom. He's made impact as a founding member and chair of the Physicians for Human Rights. He's desegregated the health systems in North Carolina. Bob's written many letters to Congress protesting the human rights violations during the Cold War, and was then called to participate to investigate human rights conditions because he had written the most number of letters to Congress. He's been a true hero in health and human rights.
What Bob was doing in that rubric of, quote, therapeutic listening was something that today we would call trauma-informed care. It's now only 3+ decades after that I feel like I'm slowly catching up to Bob.
I want to say to him how grateful I am that he really trusted me to come to CHA, and I think he make a huge difference in the care of the community I'm helping. And on behalf of the community, the Haitian community, I want to say a big thank you.
Bob always found time for the people that he cared about, and he cared about a lot of people.
Bob has remained a friend, a colleague, a soundboard, and a source of support. So it is such a privilege to be here to honor him today.
It really was sometimes feeling as if he's gone off the edge of the earth and you had faith that he would return, but you would not know until he got to some place where he could make a phone call. I'm really pleased that you're honoring him in this way. He's been through a lot with all the different phases of PHR, but he's always had his focus on the importance of the work, and I'm glad it's still going on.
It is my great pleasure and my privilege to honor my friend, Dr. Robert Lawrence. Bob Lawrence is the recipient of the Physicians for Human Rights Award for his extraordinary leadership and impact on human rights and global health, including in his role as the founder of Physicians for Human Rights. The medical expertise of physicians has greatly enhanced the reliability and the credibility of human rights fact-finding in cases of physical abuse, torture, and deaths, and in many other respects. It has also provided the professional backing that is needed by physicians and other health professionals all over the world as they adhere to professional standards when they are under fire by repressive regimes. Bob's missions to such countries as Chile, when it was ruled by Pinochet, and to Czechoslovakia, when it was under communist rule, demonstrated the crucial role that physicians play in the protection of human rights. Bob has served as PHR's board chair, as an investigator for PHR, as a spokesperson, as a fundraiser, as a mentor, as a colleague, and as a friend. Among Bob's many legacies, perhaps his greatest contribution has been to help entire generations of clinicians in the US and around the world to rethink what it means to be a clinician. The responsibility of physicians is not only to treat illness, but to care for the whole person and indeed for the whole society. Dr. Robert Lawrence, I am honored to present you with the PHR Human Rights Award. Congratulations. And now, over to Anna Werner of CBS News for a conversation with Bob Lawrence.
I'm Anna Werner of CBS News, and I'm pleased to be here with Bob Lawrence, founding member of Physicians for Human Rights. When PHR was dreamed up, basically, it was only 6 of you, which is a pretty small group. What did you think could be accomplished with 6 people, and where did you think you could make a difference?
The 6 of us at this time of sitting together and deciding to form this new organization had each participated in an investigation of human rights abuses. And we were focused on the problems associated with the Cold War and the US, at that time it was the Reagan administration, having some pretty unsavory bedfellows. And what we wanted to do when we heard reports of really gross human rights, abductions, disappearances, torture, being perpetrated by allies of the United States, we wanted to collect the data, document the abuses, and then come back and advocate for our own government to either stop supporting these dictatorial regimes or to apply contingencies on continued military assistance.
You've been to a lot of places with PHR, Chile, Philippines, Kosovo. Is there a story or a moment, a memory for you that stands out that you always come back to?
When we went to South Africa before apartheid was disbanded, we wanted to go openly as a human rights organization. Jack Geiger and I were the PHR representatives on that team. We learned that there were 3 people on hunger strike in the Groote Hospital in Cape Town. And I went in posing as a visiting doctor. And then I sat down, introduced myself to the hunger striker, and said that I was a physician from the United States representing Physicians for Human Rights. And I wanted to get his story and see if we could do something to help bring about resolution to the problem that he was striking over. I had a small tape recorder with me, and I started, was carefully positioned so that if the door opened, the tape recorder was below the level of the bed. And then we used that within the group of NAMDA, the National Association of Doctors and Dentists Against Apartheid, to help this man. Carola and I did have a wonderful experience in Chile where in an attempt to put a better face on his regime, Pinochet, after 8 years of dictatorship, he turned the election of the Colegio Médico, the Chilean Medical Society, back to the members rather than having his regime appoint the leadership. And so the members of the Colegio Medico promptly elected 3 or 4 people for the senior positions who were all very opposed to the dictatorship. When Pinochet put all that together, he promptly threw the 4 leaders of the Colegio Medico in prison. And PHR received an urgent request to send people to express solidarity. And Carola and I flew to Santiago, and we went to the prison. The expression on the faces of these 4 doctors to see the people, 2 physicians from the United States had come, was extremely satisfying. 3 days later, after advocating before one of the courts in Santiago, they were released. That's the kind of thing that doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it certainly adds impetus to keep going.
What do you think has motivated you all these years to do this work?
I was a preacher's kid, and my immigrant father, who used to say to my older brother and me, you can be anything you want to do as long as it's socially useful. My senior year in college, I was a history major, and I chose to write my thesis on South African apartheid in 1959. My tutor initially said that's not a suitable subject for a modern European history major. I asked why. He said nothing of historic significance is happening in Africa. So I went back to my rooms very discouraged, spoke to my roommate, Paul Buttenwieser, and he said, well, the history department is so hopelessly Anglophilic. Why don't you write about British opinion about South Africa, about apartheid? I returned. My tutor grudgingly accepted that. My thesis was due April 1st, 1960. March 26th, 1960 was the Sharpeville massacre, where 60 blacks were shot and killed by the South African security forces. Banner headline across the top of the front page of the New York Times. So 3 days later, I took the front page of the New York Times and I wrapped my thesis in it and I handed it to my tutor. And I said, just in case you still think nothing of historic significance is happening in Africa.
Bob Lawrence, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Hello again. I'm Alan Jones, Chair of the Board of Physicians for Human Rights. For nearly 40 years at PHR, we've used our unique perspectives as scientists and healthcare professionals to establish fact-based records of human rights abuses. We use our authoritative voice to fight back, protect human rights, and end impunity for perpetrators, and we provide the tools and support to help frontline workers continue and grow that work. Thank you to the heroes of health and human rights who we celebrated tonight. Dr. Bob Lawrence, Nurse Dawn Wooten, Dr. Hussam al-Nahhas, and the health workers of Myanmar. You've displayed remarkable courage, and your examples inspire us all. Thanks also to Arya Nair, Joby Warwick, Sarah Stillman, Anna Werner, and Julianna Margulies for your participation. Thanks to my fellow co-chairs, Marion and Stanley Bergman, Sharon and Bradley Connor, Carolyn and Raymond Happy, Kristen and Austin Ratner, and Kerry Selkowitz, and to the PHR staff who make this work possible, including the team who organized the virtual celebration. And finally, thank you to our viewers and donors. Your support makes this life-saving work possible. We couldn't do it without you. Our world is facing extraordinary challenges, but PHR was made for this moment, and your support ensures we will be ready for whatever comes next. Thank you.
Even as our world continues to be challenged by a global pandemic, a growing refugee crisis, war, and profound inequality, tonight has shown once again that PHR is meeting the moment. The world needs the expertise of health professionals more than ever to fight for the rights of all. And PHR is doubling down on its commitment to put science and medicine at the service of justice, equity, and human rights. Thank you for joining us tonight. Your support makes this inspiring work possible.